If you watched my previous video on what a habit is, then you know that a habit is a learned association between a cue and a behavior. The simplest way of tackling a bad habit is to avoid the cue. No cue, no behavior. So if you have a habit of drinking when you are in social situations with your friends, just avoid social situations. If you have a habit of drinking coffee on the way you go to work, maybe avoid walking by any coffee shops. If you're paying attention here, you can see some problems with this approach. Sometimes we want to be in the situation that is the cue for the behavior. So if we have friends, we want to hang out with them in social situations, we just don't want the kind of the behavior, the drinking, say, if that's the behavior we want to stop. And sometimes we can't avoid the cue in the first place. So walking through the city, trying to avoid coffee shops is pretty much impossible. But there's another drawback to this method as well. So suppose we managed to avoid all the coffee shops and we stopped drinking coffee every day, if that's what we wanted to stop. Well, we might think to ourselves, yeah, I did it! I broke this bad habit, now I don't do it anymore. But we haven't actually tackled the habit. Remember that the habit is the learned association between the cue and the behavior. Now we've stopped performing the behavior, but we haven't changed that association. So in a way, avoiding the cue also avoids fundamentally changing that learned association that we have. The second way of tackling a bad habit might sound a little silly. It's called vigilant monitoring. And to do this, we have to be aware that we have the habit in the first place. So we have to know a little bit about the situations that lead to the behavior and what the behavior is. And then once we understand that, then what we tell ourselves is, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Resist, resist. In other words, we are using our deliberative mind to tackle what is largely an automated behavior. The advantage of this approach is that it tackles the right thing. It tackles that learned association and tries to weaken that learned association over time. The disadvantage is that it can backfire if you're dealing with a temptation and not a habit. Temptations and habits seem to operate through different cognitive pathways. So a habit, like we've said before, is something that happens regularly in the same time, in the same place, in the same situation. Whenever you confront that situation, you perform the behavior. And it's something that you do largely without thinking about it. You don't have to focus on it, you just do it automatically. But a temptation is something that doesn't occur in a regular time, place, or situation, but it is cued by something. Maybe it's cued by a thought you have, maybe it's cued by an advertisement that you see, maybe someone mentions something to you. And so there is a cue there, but it doesn't have the regularity of the habit. And the other thing with temptations is that it's not done automatically. You don't do it without thinking about it. You're actually really, really into it. With a temptation, there's a lot of enjoyment that you get out of that thing. So you are focused mentally on enjoying whatever it is you're doing. So if you try to use vigilant monitoring with temptations, it's going to backfire, because what vigilant monitoring does is it makes that temptation more prominent in your mind, which makes it harder to resist. A different technique, like distraction, is more effective for temptations. A third way of tackling a bad habit is to keep the basic association between the cue and the behavior the same, but nudge the path a little bit. So we're still going to perform something when we see the cue, but the behavior is going to be a little different. So imagine every time I watch TV, I ate chocolate, and I wanted to stop this bad habit. Well, one approach would be to substitute what I'm eating for the chocolate. So instead of eating chocolate, I might have raisins instead, which are, I don't know, marginally more healthy for me, I suppose. So the cue is still triggering a behavior, and I still perform some kind of behavior, but the behavior is different than the original behavior that we had. There are lots and lots of other ways to stop yourself from doing something that you don't want to do, but for habits, these 3 techniques that I've outlined are kind of the fundamental building blocks or fundamental tools in your toolbox. If you want to share a technique that's worked for you, or maybe one that hasn't worked for you, let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time.